Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Live in Conversation event. Tonight we have the pleasure of talking to Australian crime writer Chris Hammer. Chris is a leading Australian crime fiction novelist, author of international bestsellers Scrublands and Silver. His new novel, Trust, has just been released. His first novel, Scrublands, was an instant bestseller upon publication in 2018, topping the Australian fiction charts. It has also been optioned for a television series. Scrublands was shortlisted for major writing awards in Australia, the UK and the United States. In the UK, it was named the Sunday Times Crime Novel of the Year in 2019 and won the prestigious UK Crime Writers Association John Creasy New Blood Dagger Award. Before turning to fiction, Chris was a journalist for more than 30 years. He reported from more than 30 countries on 6 continents for SBS TV. Welcome to the library, Chris, and thank you for talking to me.
Thanks, Janine. So nice to be with you.
Oh, that's great. Gee, you've got a really good bio there. You've done so much in such a short space of time as far as your writing goes, but of course it goes back further than that, doesn't it? Did you get a lot of your inspiration from your work as a journalist overseas?
Look, some of it. The protagonist in the 3 books, Martin Scarsden, is a journalist. The first 2 books, Scrublands and Silver, the stories are very much told from his point of view. This new book, Trust, is a bit different because it has alternating points of view. You kind of get Martin for one chapter and then Mandy, his partner, Mandalay Blonde, for the next, and it alternates. So Martin isn't based on me. He's more based on some of the journalists, the foreign correspondents, particularly the war correspondents I met in my travels, the ones who are suffering PTSD and a bit damaged. And that was the idea. And the first book, Scrublands, starts with him visiting a small country town to do a story a year on from a terrible shooting where a priest has shot some of his parishioners dead. And then actually, I did stories like that as a journalist. For example, I went to Aceh a year after the tsunami, but probably closer to the feel of Scrublands. I went to a small country town in East Texas called Jasper, where some months before some white extremists had killed an African-American man by tying him to the back of their pickup truck and dragging him until he was dead. It was a crime that shocked America and the world for that matter. I went there to do a story, just as Martin does in Scrublands, about how the town was coping with that awful event. What I found in Texas was totally different, though, in that it was really a story about race. It was a racially divided town, whereas that's not an issue in Scrublands at all. But I think those sort of experiences as a journalist have fed in to the book somewhat, yeah.
Yeah, good. And also for everybody who is watching, if anyone's got any questions for Chris, just pop them in the chat below and he'll answer them towards the end of our chat. What was your road to publication, Chris? Because you had written a couple of non-fiction books yourself many years before you wrote these 3.
Yeah, so I had a book called The River, which published in 2010, and another one called The Coast, published in 2012 by Melbourne University Press. Non-fiction books, kind of like travel books. So narrative non-fiction, they call it. So you can be a bit impressionistic, you can be a bit flowery. I found I really loved writing. It's one thing I learned, but the second thing I learned that there was no money in it. So I went back and got a real job again, but I kind of missed writing. So I just started writing the book called Scrublands, more or less as a kind of a hobby, a self-indulgence. A bit more serious than that, in that I intended to get it published, but I didn't think it would do that well. I didn't think I could make a career out of it, in other words. Anyway, I worked away on it 4 or 5 years. I sent it to an agent who'd agreed to represent me, and then just as it was just about ready to go out to publishers, as luck would have it, at the time I thought it was terribly bad. I lost my job. I was working for the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age in the press gallery. I was doing video production, and they just cut the whole video production team, essentially. So I was out of a job, and then I actually had a brilliant career for 3 weeks working as a political advisor. But then I was saved from that, thank God, by getting this fantastic book deal with Allen and Unwin, and then subsequently with publishers overseas. And now I'm a full-time writer, which is how I'm able to, write 3 books in 3 years.
Yeah. Perhaps you did perhaps when you're a political advisor, you didn't give them the right advice.
I gave them the right advice after 3 weeks, which was, you don't need me, seriously, I quit.
That'd be a shocking job to have anyway, wouldn't it, really?
Oh, yeah, very tough, very long hours, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Now, with trust, I'll put it up again, this one here. That's the first book of yours that I've actually read, and I've heard nothing but good things about the previous 2. Can you tell everyone a little bit what this book is actually about?
Okay, so I'll try and not give any spoilers.
No spoilers.
The setup is this, the first few pages, so it's not really a spoiler. We're with Martin Scarsden and his partner Mandalay Blonde. And at the end of Silver, they've kind of not retired, but they've moved to this beautiful town, Port Silver. Mandy's inherited a house on the cliffs overlooking the town. Everything's going swimmingly. And then all of a sudden, Mandy is abducted. Martin finds an unconscious policeman on the floor of their home with Mandy gone. And pretty soon after that, he learns that Mandy, who's been living with, by this time, a couple of years, was once engaged to an undercover policeman in Sydney, and the body of the undercover policeman has just been found, sort of buried in the concrete foundations of a building there. So right from the start, it's kind of go. And right from the start, you're teasing a little bit on that, on the title of the book, Trust. Mandy hasn't trusted Martin enough to tell him about this prior engagement, that she's been hoping just to keep the past buried and not have to confront it. So she hasn't trusted him with that information. He's now thinking, well, how can I trust her? And then as the plot unfolds, both of them wonder, can they trust the police? Can they trust the authority? Can they trust the justice system? Can they trust the media? Can they trust politicians? Generally, the answer is no, but that's not a huge spoiler.
Well, there were a lot of characters in this book too, because you had about 2 or 3 subplots happening early on, and I know I had to concentrate on thinking which set of characters belonged to which subplot, but that was okay, and it all did come together in the end. But it was quite handy too in the front of the book, which I might be able to show. Let's see. Chris put a map of Sydney there as well. And I really liked that because as you're reading the book, he refers to various locations and various characters throughout the book. And by having a look at that map, you could get a really good picture of where these places were. And I mean, as you said before, Chris, if you don't know Sydney, you would have no idea. And I mean, I've been to Sydney, but I can't say that I know Sydney. So it was really good to be able to refer back to that when the characters said, they were heading to Aldo's coffee shop. Right, that's where it is. And I believe you've done that in your previous 2 books as well. There's a map in those as well. Is that right? Or is there?
That's right. No, that's right. And that's how it ended up being there in Trust. So the first 2 books, Scrublands and Silver, are set in fictional towns. And that meant as I was writing the book, particularly as I was writing the first book, Scrublands, which, as I said, I wrote over a number of years, I just drew a map just for my own reference to be consistent. So if in chapter 1, Martin takes 5 minutes to walk from the motel to, the bookstore, that, in chapter 23, it's not half an hour, or the bookstores change location or something like that. So when it came to sending the book off to the publisher, I thought, I'll just include my very crudely hand-drawn map. And in conversation with her, we thought we would get someone to illustrate it, which is fantastic. We found a fantastic artist, a guy called Alex Potocznik, who lives in Melbourne. But the thing was, he'd only just arrived in Australia about 6 months before, and he didn't know what a country town looked like. So I was sending him pictures of what a country pub looks like and wheat silos, and he's going, "Oh, you sure they're that big?" I'm going, "Yeah, they're big." And then I did the same with Silver, which again is in a fictional town. So when we came to Sydney, I thought, look, it might, just for the consistency, but also Trust is not set in tourist Sydney. It's not the Bridge and the Opera House and Bondi Beach and those areas of Sydney that people from interstate would be familiar with. It's a more gritty sort of inner city feel.
City, yep.
So and there are times when Martin actually catches glimpses of that kind of harbour city, but it's almost like it's been denied him. And what also the map shows is, even though Sydney's a huge city, the events all take place within a very small area. There's nothing on the North Shore, there's nothing on the beaches, there's nothing in Western Sydney, there's nothing in the Shire to the south. It's all very confined, and it's also a confined number of days. It's told over about a week or so. So confined space, confined time. And the map, I just love the map because Alex has found exactly the right perspective where the reader gets to know where everything else is, but there are a couple of those famous landmarks there for references, the Opera House and the Bridge and the Centrepoint Tower and stuff like that. So, yeah, I really love the maps.
Yeah. And that'll help your overseas readers too, when they get some idea too, that they won't know what Sydney's like, but by looking at the map, they'll have a fairly good idea. Because again, overseas readers probably only identify Sydney with the Opera House, the Sydney Harbour Bridge, So that, I think that was really, really good. I really enjoyed that. It's really good that there's so many new Australian crime writers have appeared on the scene. We've got yourself, we've got Catherine Firkin, who we spoke to earlier. She's a debut novelist, a crime novel set in Melbourne. Jane Harper, of course. It's fabulous just to see, and I think we relate very well to crime novels that are set in our own backyard, whereas in the past it's been mainly UK and USA crime writers that we've had, which are good, don't get me wrong, but you don't know the locations, you don't know what they're talking about or where they're talking about. And I just think it's great. Do you think there's why have we all of a sudden come across guys like you that all of a sudden have started writing about Australian crime?
Well, there always were people who tried to do it, but it was very, very difficult. So Peter Temple, of course, had the Jack Irish series, and there was also the Murray Whalen series that was set in Melbourne as well. But I've spoken to writers who tell me that even 10 or 15 years ago, they were really strongly advised not to set books in Australia, that not only wouldn't they sell internationally, they wouldn't sell here. I think that's been completely turned on its head now, largely, I think, due to the success of Jane Harper and her breakthrough book, The Dry. It did so very well here and so very well internationally that suddenly the publishers were going, people, this will sell. And so that was about the time that my book Scrublands came out. There's Christian White, is a great Melbourne-based writer. JP Pomari lives down there as well, Mark Brandy. So there's a lot of very good Melbourne-based writers. Kate Mildenhall just had a really good book. But yeah, there's a good group of people who are selling books not only here but internationally. Candice Fox is another one.
Yes.
Dervla McTiernan, Emma Viskich, another really good Melbourne-based writer. So there's a lot of really good Australian crime.
Well, I think people love crime. I mean, we find in the library, the true crime section of the library is where the books they never come back, or they get stolen, or, you know, it's amazing
they're
how
inspired, right?
exactly. You wonder why, you know, they're stealing these books. Are they planning to kill someone or what? But it really is fascinating. And the people that borrow them, you know, you don't judge a book by its cover. You don't judge the borrower by the book either. You know,
Yeah.
it really is quite funny.
I-
But there's, yeah, go on.
I must say though, I'm really very keen to just stick with fiction, because you can just make it up, right? And the trouble with true crime is often what makes it interesting is, in some ways, is you don't know all the facts of the story. You're kind of speculating. Whereas with fiction, of course, you can tie up all the loose ends.
Oh, absolutely. And there also seems to be another subgenre of crime that's really popular at the moment too, is like a domestic noir, or, you know, a thriller type that involves people, like, you know, a husband and a wife or a relative or something like that, that they really seem to have come out of the woodwork too.
Yes, a couple of really good ones. Christian White books are like that. There's a new one that's coming out soon called The Family Doctor. I think next year. I just read a kind of a preliminary copy of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all about domestic violence, but it's a very exciting and thrilling book. Yeah, so they're kind of more like standalone books. I guess mine are more traditional, at least in the sense that you have an outside investigator. In my case, it's Martin Scarsden, who's a journalist. Other people will have police are often, of course, used. Sometimes other more interesting people, journalists, lawyers, psychologists.
Yep.
Yeah, but there is a lot of variety in that sort of crime, suspense, thriller shelf. So you get also those kind of outright action thriller, you know, more the Jack Reacher type books where it's not a mystery. You know who's the bad people are. It's just, you know, is the hero going to get out alive or not?
That's right. Are there any, did you set out to write a trilogy when you wrote Scrublands?
Yes and no. yes, but not this trilogy. I had this idea of writing a real trilogy. In other words, with storylines extending over all three books. I sent the first one off. I got a really nice review from that literary agency saying that they really loved the first 70% of the book, but you can't write a crime book without telling people
who did it in the end.
But I mean, like, how bleeding obvious is that, right? So I went and do it, and then I wrote Scrublands, and so it's a trilogy in one sense, but as you yourself have said, you can read books as standalone. So you can read Trust, and then if you like it, go back and read the first two. Or you can start with Scrublands and work your way forward. I probably wouldn't start with Silver, the middle one, because then you wouldn't know where to go next. But,
are there any updates on your option for TV for Scrublands?
Yeah, so it's been optioned by a couple of really excellent Australian production companies, Easy Tiger and Rev Lover. And the news we're getting is it's under development. They have broadcasters and streaming services interested. And at some point, hopefully, it'll get the green light and we'll be off and running. But there's a lot of work gets optioned and then doesn't.
Money's the other thing too.
And well, a lot of production, of course, all around the world has been thrown out of whack by COVID. Australia, fortunately, our film and TV industry is now back up and operating, which is fortunate because they're Australian companies that have the rights to Scrublands.
Oh, that's good.
And hopefully there'll be an appetite for it overseas as well. Also, if they do go ahead and make Scrublands, then they have the option of continuing on and making Silver and Trust as follow-up series too.
So will it be a movie or will it be like a mini-series?
It'll be like a mini-series.
Yeah.
It'll be 6 1-hour episodes. I'm really happy about that because I think there's too much in the books to squash into a movie. You'd have to chop things out.
Yes.
And if you kept a lot of the plot, then you'd cut out lot of the character development and a lot of the personal, emotional story.
And of course, then you'll have people saying the book was better than the movie too, which a lot of times we always say that the book was better than the movie. So at least if it's a mini series, they've got more time to actually stick to the book a little bit more.
That's true. I mean, I think some of the best, particularly the best character-driven productions are those long-form television. The other thing I really love now about crime is once upon a time, you tune in 1 hour a week, and if it was a series, you'd have to wait an entire week.
I know.
And it's one of the things I guess we've all been doing in lockdown, right, is just binging.
Absolutely.
And the interesting thing is I think people binge crime series on streaming services, but it seems then they're interested in reading the books too. And I think this might help explain why Australian books are popular internationally too.
Yeah. Well, I think I heard on the news this morning, I think it's one of the big movie production houses in America are going to release all their 2021 movies coming up are all going to go to streaming. They're not going to go to the cinemas because they reckon with COVID, everyone has been watching streaming. Cinemas, they still, is still in doubt as to whether they can get, enough people to go and watch it or want to leave their homes to go and see to the movies. So they're starting to put everything onto streaming, apparently.
Yeah, I wouldn't go to a cinema in America.
No, definitely not at the moment. That was the other point that I wanted to bring up too with Trust. Is yours is the first book that I've read that has a reference to COVID in it. Were you still writing this when COVID first hit? Is that why you've put it in?
So what happened there was I pretty much had my polished draft. So I'd reworked and worked up to as good as I could get it. And I gave it to the publisher round about mid-February. So this was a time just as, COVID, there'd been the news of this sort of exotic virus that was killing people in China. And then within a couple of weeks, it kind of exploded and suddenly we were going into lockdown and closing our borders. That was about the time I'd given the book with no references to COVID. And then the editing process started. And my initial thought was, look, I'll just ignore it. People will just think the book was set last year or something like that. My problem there, though, was there's lots of references in the book to the bushfire sort of crisis. And, there's a couple of days there. It's in Sydney, it's in winter, but there's bushfire smoke everywhere because sort of some controlled burning has got out of control. And I was thinking, how can I reference one big recent disaster, and totally ignore the other one? So I introduced sort of retrospectively in that editing process references to COVID. So in the book, it's set in winter in Sydney. So hopefully it's sort of like winter 2021. The pandemic's over. I don't explain why it's over, whether it's a vaccine or it's a great treatment or whether it's just lockdown. But it actually fits the feel of the book because it's a kind of gritty, a little bit depressed sort of Sydney. So the economic, the virus is gone, but the economic consequences live on. And it also, a couple of people have a crack, say at Manly, and say, look, it's all right for you. You've been self-isolated up in your wonderful house on the North Coast. You haven't had to put up with what we've had to put up here, sort of thing. So it wasn't actually that hard to retrofit. It actually lent a little bit extra to the book, if anything, I think.
Yeah, because a lot of authors have been saying they just won't set books in 2020 because we don't know yet what the end result is going to be. We hope the vaccine will fix things, but we just don't know. So they'll set their books in 2021 ignoring COVID or back in 2019.
I have read a couple where just at the end of the books, there's news starting to come out of China about this.
But it's towards
virus.
The end.
Yeah, that's right. And you think, oh, I know. So the book is set in, 2019.
Yeah. Now, how has it been for you, of course, launching a book during COVID? You haven't been able to do your library tours as such and your bookshop, although you have been able to do a little bit more than, well, no one could come to Victoria, that's for sure, but you've been able to do a little bit more. But I suppose it's just different. We get to do things like this, which we wouldn't have been able to do had it not been for COVID. So there's got to be some good things as well.
And so, look, I like, after being locked away for months writing a book, it is nice to get out and see people. But on the other hand, as a writer, I haven't been that badly affected. Books are still selling. I have friends who are artists or musicians who just lost all their work. And, lots of other people, small business people, have had a very hard time. And that's here in Australia. I mean, much worse internationally. So, I can't really complain at all. I've been able to continue on writing, and hopefully there'll be, when the next book's out, I'll be able to get out and about a bit more then.
Oh, that's good. And do you have another one in the pipeline?
I'm working away on one. Yeah, I try and do that. Otherwise, I get too anxious about when the book's coming out, about how it will be received. I'm fine until it's out of my control. So it helps if it helps in all sorts of ways. But so I've been working away on a new one.
Will this be a continuation of the characters that have been in these, or is this a new one altogether?
A little bit of both. So Martin and Mandy, I don't think are going to be the main characters, but they might pop up as minor characters, not as point of view characters. So it's kind of set, if you like, in the same universe in that it's contemporary Australia, but some of the characters will continue on that have been in the previous books. So it's not just Martin and Mandy that continue on, for example, into Trust. There's some of the journalists who continue on, Darcy Defoe and Doug Thunkleton and Bethany Glass and Max Fuller. And there are police officers like Morris Montefiore and Ivan Lukic and Klaus Vandenbroek. There's Mandy's lawyer, Winifred Barbacombe. These are people that have all been in the previous books as well. So they'll continue on, and one or two of them may end up being point of view characters.
And where will the next one be set? You've got to find a different location now almost, although you could still leave it in Sydney, couldn't you?
I could. I don't think I will. I think I'll go somewhere fictional again. It's fun making up these towns and the maps.
Another map to create. And we've got a lot of aspiring writers that, watch these live in conversations. Have you got any advice that you could pass on or any tips for them?
Look, there are numerous tips. I would say enjoy what you're doing. Enjoy the process and try and make it fun for yourself. This is what I inadvertently did with Scrublands, in that after my experience with the non-fiction books, my expectation was that I could write a book that was good enough to be published, but it wouldn't necessarily do that well. I knew that from my experience with my previous book, so it wasn't like I was staking too much on it.
Right.
And that led me to the other thing, which was not just having fun, but all I really cared about was making the book as good as I could get it and not worrying about me and how I would be perceived or how I would be received or anything. So a problem that a lot of aspiring writers encounter inevitably is that sort of self-doubt. Am I good enough? Well, don't worry about that. Don't worry about whether you're good enough. Just worry about whether the book's good enough. And that'll keep the focus on that and you'll be right.
Well, 3 books later, do you still have self-doubt?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. It's not so much self-doubt. Is this manuscript going to work? Because the way I write, I don't entirely know where a book's going where I start. So I'm a bit worried that it's all just going to end up being a horrible mess or a big flop or, Now, I've done 3 in a row that have ended up pretty, working out okay. So I should be a bit more relaxed about it. But, of course, I have days where I just don't feel like writing too.
Yeah.
I think everyone has those.
What's your writing day look like? Do you set yourself like a target of so many words a day, or do you write better in the morning or in the afternoon, or do you sort of get up, have breakfast and think, right, I've got to put my bum on that seat and I've got to write some words?
So it's changed. When I was writing Scrublands, I had a full-time job, quite a demanding job, many hours, and the kids were a bit younger. So I was stealing hours to write, late at night, typically, a few hours on the weekend. Once I became a full-time writer, that changed. I write in the morning. I don't give myself any kind of word target. Some days I get stuck. If there's a problem with the plot, something's not working, and I might just stare at the screen and then give up and go for a walk or whatever. But in the end, those sort of days can be just as productive as the days where the words are absolutely flowing out. I've got a loose sense of where I need to be by a certain time, and that's kind of enough. I do write most days, pretty much every day, and a lot of aspiring writers go, "Wow, that's great. That's such great self-discipline. I wish I was like that." It's not that, because I'm actually a terrific procrastinator. It's that I've kind of become addicted to it. I really like the writing thing. So, it's like some days when I actually don't feel much like writing and I just do a bit, and suddenly, an idea will come, a fresh idea, and I'll end up a few hours later and it'll be one of the most best productive days going. So it can be a little bit unexpected like that. So yeah, I work most days, but I'm more like the gym junkie who needs the exercise once a day and a coffee.
Oh, none of us can survive without a coffee. There's no doubt about that. How long does it take you to write a book, roughly? How many months does it take you to write a book these days? Now you're a full-time writer. Yeah.
Well, about a year. So, and they overlap a little bit. So I would have started writing on the book I'm working on now a few months before Trust came out, because there comes a point where you've finished all the editing, and then the publisher needs to get it printed. They need to have all the typesetting done. They often like to bring some advanced copies out to get to critics and to booksellers to try and prime the market.
Yep.
So there's a couple of months there. So I'd start working there. So Scrublands came out in sort of July 2018. Silver came out in October last year.
Yep.
Trust came out in October this year. So it's about a year. It's about a year's work. Yeah.
But I think that's good, though. You don't want to become like one of Courtney's favourite authors, James Patterson, that puts out so many books per year and they're 4-page chapters. I'd rather get one quality book a year from an author I love rather than get at least 8 or 10. I think he pumps them out at a rate of knots. I don't know how he does it, and I don't know whether he actually writes them anymore.
Well, that's how he does it. He doesn't write them, which I simply can't understand, because I actually like writing a book. It's all like, I don't know, what's he going to do when he retires? Like write books? I don't know. Anyway, good luck to him. And I know he's a great supporter of literacy and libraries and that. So, more power to him. And I don't get it myself, but good luck to him.
That's all right. That's fine. Now, I think we might have a question from someone. Marnie is asking, is there a novel you wish you'd written?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? Not really. There are novels that you read and they're so good you just think, oh, if only I could have, not that I could have written that book, that I could be a good enough writer to write a book like that, I think. Yeah.
And also, actually, Leah is asking too, are there any plans for further Martin Scarsden novels? So I think we've sort of covered that.
Well, this next book probably isn't featuring Martin and Mandy, but I think at some point in the future I'll bring them back. One of the problems with, one of the features of the books, and one of the things I like, is Martin and Mandy aren't just disinterested investigators. They're not going through them. He's just not researching a crime in order to get a good newspaper story. He's personally involved, and they have the stories about their relationships and how they develop as people. I think that works well. The trouble is, I've got crime plots are pretty easy to come up with, but these sort of personal stories, and they've been through so much.
How much more do you want to take them through? That's the thing.
Exactly.
They've got to cut a break sooner or later.
That's right. But on the other hand, if that's what readers are kind of used to, I don't want to cheat them by having a book where they're simply completely disinterested investigators. So I think there will be more Martin and Mandy, at least one more book, probably a couple, maybe the one after this. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, he's a pretty cool character, Martin, too. He just seems to, he doesn't, like when he's under pressure, like he has been in that book, he seems to handle it better than the average person, that's for sure. So he's got a bit of longevity, I think, left in him. He's not going to, crumble, having a nervous breakdown when someone's, threatening him or Mandy. He seems to be pretty cool.
Yeah, no, he's already done that.
Leah has just said, I'd love to know more about Chris's writing process and his top 3 tips for writers. Well, I think we just covered that as well, virtually.
Yeah. Another one you hear is write what you know. I don't particularly subscribe to that, but I would subscribe to the idea of write what you like.
Mm.
So something you yourself would like to read, and write it as if it's for you. Imagine a book that you'd like to read. So don't try and write something that you think might impress, judges or publishers. Don't write something you think, oh, this is what I need to write to get a bestseller, because you're probably wrong, and you tend to mimic other writers, successful writers, if you do that. And a lot of publishers, particularly say in crime fiction, they don't want a cookie cut out of James Patterson or Ian Rankin or Val McDermott or Michael Robotham. They're looking for something a bit original.
A point of difference, something different.
So write kind of what you know, but more write what you like.
Yeah. No, that sounds good. What books and authors inspire you, Chenza is asking?
Look, pretty much any author, anyone who tries to write a book and succeeds in writing a book, I think, have a lot of admiration for, because all writers typically, their first book, even these, huge international stars who sell millions of books, they all pretty much started on the kitchen table, right?
Yep.
Writing in their spare time, holding down full-time jobs. And that in some ways, I think is very inspiring. I do like a lot of Australian contemporary fiction writers, Trent Dalton, Richard Flanagan, Tim Winton, Sophie Laguna, Michelle de Kretser, Charlotte Wood. I like, there's a lot of really good Australian contemporary fiction. And, nowadays I read a lot of crime fiction too.
Yes.
I still think Peter Temple is is probably the best Australian crime writer we've had. But the list goes on.
Oh, it does. There's so many of them. Now, Terry is also asking, if non-fiction was more lucrative financially, would you prefer to author that genre?
No.
No.
I tell you why. I spent 30 years as a journalist and I loved it and I got to see the world and whatever. But it's quite constraining being a journalist, particularly in this country. You've got to worry about defamation laws. You've got to worry about contempt of court. You've got to worry about contempt of parliament. You've got to worry about protecting your sources. You've got to fight to get your stories in the newspapers. You've got to convince your boss that it's worth maybe the legal strife of going ahead with a story. And there's a potential you could hurt people or put them in harm's way. So there's ethical considerations. And there's also that point that at the end of the day, you might not know what really happened. After all the decades of doing that as a journalist, I find fiction really liberating. I just like, just the way you can imagine things and create things just out of nothing. It's kind of the magic of it for me. So I love doing that. So for me, I love writing fiction now, more than non-fiction. My non-fiction books are kind of like travel writing, and I do like that because it is kind of impressionistic. You can just write what you feel and think. It's just not a recitation of facts. But there is some fantastic non-fiction, and it's interesting. Some readers love non-fiction, some love fiction, and then there's people who like both.
With being a journalist too now, Chris, I mean, probably back in your day, before social media, and even with, the Herald Sun and that, you get the paper in the morning, but then there's updates during the day online. I mean, it must put more pressure on journalists now to sort of be constantly pumping information through to the newspapers, rather than have that one that gets printed in the morning and then you don't hear anything else until the next day. Do you think that's made a difference, having social media as well?
Absolutely. The news cycle has just sped up. I used to go off internationally back in the 90s, and I'd go to places and I'd just be completely off grid. I mean, my people wouldn't know where I was for weeks on end. Nowadays they'd be constantly in contact by email and whatever message services, whatever. But the thing that's really hit all the media in Australia is the business model has come under severe pressure. So newspapers like The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald would have a quarter of the journalists that worked for them 15 or 20 years ago.
Wow.
And that's because although you pay that cover price, it's really advertising that supports the business model, and it's all been cannibalised particularly by Google and Facebook. It's the same thing like your free television, Channel 7, Channel 9, whatever. You don't pay a red cent, right? It's all through advertising. But now those advertisers can advertise online on YouTube or whatever. So, and of course the ABC and SBS have had their funding cut over the years. So being a journalist is not the career it once was. I think you have to work harder, more quickly, with less resources. It's a tough game now.
Now, Courtney's asking, what books have you read this year that you really loved?
Oh, I've got such a bad memory. I should have my list. So there's one I've just read called The Family Doctor that's coming out next year. I did like Michael Rowbotham's books. I really liked Derville and McTiernan's latest book, The Good Turn. Kate Mildenhall's book, The Mother Fault. There was another couple I read. Where the Crawdads Sing, which is a good book.
Oh, yes, that was good. Yep.
I like Charlotte Wood's book, The Weekend. That's about where I'm up to now. I read a Tana French book called The Searcher, which I really like too. Bit of a break from Aussie crime. But I just can't.
You could go on and on. Yeah.
And I do get a bit worried sometimes at certain points when I'm writing that I want to stop reading because I'm a bit worried that I might start imitating someone else's voice. And it's very important in any book that you have a consistency of voice, your own style throughout the entire book. So I'm probably coming up in a few months to a point where I'll just stop reading for a while I just concentrate exclusively on the sound of my own book. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And a lot of authors too have said that if you want to be a writer, you must be a reader too. You can't be a writer if you're not a reader. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to read religiously, and you could read all the books in the world and still not be a very good writer.
Yeah.
So the writing process really comes down to your own imagination, I guess. And then there's a whole sort of skill set, a craft set.
On how to put a book together.
Yeah, but when you're reading, almost by osmosis, you're going to pick up how a book works and when it doesn't work. And what I think there's a lot of variety, obviously, in books, authors, the way they work, all their methods. But one thing I think that a lot of successful writers have in common is that they can really self-critique their own work, whatever style it's in, and read and go, hang on, that's not working. So, for example, a crime writer like myself, you might get to the middle of the book and you go, you know what, it's getting really bogged down here. Had a great start to it, and I think the end's going to be good, but it's what can I do? What can I do to change it?
Yep.
And look, an editor's not going to do that to you. They may come and say that doesn't work, but they're not going to tell you how to fix it.
Yep.
And so the way you kind of get to recognise that, of course, is by reading books. Often I think, you learn stuff from the really good books, but also you learn stuff from books that don't work so well. You go, why didn't that really end up appealing to me? Or, why did I lose interest? It had me at the start. So either by thinking about it, but I think also almost by not thinking about it, you pick up things from reading.
Yes, no, definitely. Well, I don't think we've got any more questions. So I'll just let everybody know that all of Chris's books are available to borrow from the library in every format available: paperback, ebook, e-audiobook, audiobook. So hop on and reserve them now. Trust will also be available next week as a top title. All of your books have been top titles, Chris, and what that means is we purchase a separate collection of about 40 books, or there are 40 extra copies, and they get distributed to all of our branches so that people can come in and they can pick up what's hot at the moment and not have to wait 3 months to put it on hold at the library and wait for it to come in. And it's been really successful. And each one of your books has been a top title. They're the ones with the most holds on them at the library. So congratulations for that.
Well, thanks to you, and thanks to all your patrons.
That's all right. And what happens to them then, after they're not a top title anymore, they then get turned into a book group set, because we have book group sets at the library.
Oh.
So then they're available for the book groups to use, and, they'll take them away, and, we have questions, or if your publisher's got questions on the books, so they have a longevity of a long time, which is great.
Thank you. I'm honoured. That's a terrific
fine.
Initiative.
No problems. Now, also, Chris has been very kind and has signed some book plates here with his signature on them. So if you're thinking of buying a book for Christmas for someone, it would be ideal to buy Chris's latest book. And if you just pop in the comments, I want to win, you'll go into the draw to win one of these book plates, and then you can give it away for Christmas as a signed copy. And like my copy of Trust is going to the pool room now because it is a signed copy. So anybody who would like a book plate, please just put in your comments below, I want to win, and Courtney and I will do a draw next week, and we'll get these into the mail to you as quickly as possible, and hopefully you'll get them by Christmas. And I think it would make a great Christmas present anyway, regardless. So thank you very much, Chris, for joining us. We've really appreciated your insight into your writing and into the books. Every success I wish you with all of your writing, and we will look forward to your next book when it comes out in 12 months' time, we hope.
We hope, yeah, fingers crossed. Thank you so much for having me, Janine. Thank you for everyone for watching too.
Thank you, Chris.